Hello, everybody. Hope everybody's good out there. Before we get started, what I'd like you to all do in chat is write down something that you really love about your teen or your preteen, and then write down something that you're not real thrilled about. Okay, let's see what we come up with. Anybody think of anything that they love about their teens or they really don't like about their teens? Everybody's quiet, right? Oh, how wonderful, how smart and funny he is. Inquisitive nature. Attitude when told something they don't want to hear. Woo, definitely, definitely. Okay, let's go ahead on. So just think of those things. He's sweet and converses well with all, including parents. Wow, how nice. Wonderful. All right, so let's not panic. Everybody seems to panic when they think of their kids becoming teenagers, or even when thinking of having to deal with other teenagers. Sometimes people panic. And what we're going to do today is just try to put the period of adolescence into perspective as part of normal human development and address some of the questions and concerns we have. Okay, so we'll have plenty of time at the end also for more questions, concerns, a little bit of brainstorming. Well, we'll go ahead and start in today, just thinking about that process of human development that happens. So let's go back and think about when our wish you wouldn't spend so much time on devices. Yes. Let's go back and think about our kids when they were babies, when they were infants, when they were cute, sweet little things. And even if they were colicky or they were hard to soothe, I'm sure there were those moments when they were just so beautiful and adorable. Maybe it was only when they were asleep, but you really, really felt like, how much do you really love these babies? You think about it? You have fond memories of that time? How were your kids then? What were the babies? What was one thing that you remember about your kids when they were babies? A pleasant thing. Were they easy? Were they tough? Were they really, really cute? We forget what it was like back then, but it is important to remember what they were like when they were sweet and lovable, and you could carry them around, and they gurgled, and they were just fun, and everybody said how adorable they were. Put them up where you can remember those really cute, adorable pictures of them when they were babies. Now, they didn't stay babies for very long though, right? So what happened? They started moving into toddlerhood, and they started learning how to do things for themselves. Their fine motor and their gross motor abilities started to get a whole lot better. Physical development. They started to be able to grab things and touch things and sitting up and crawling. And then they started walking, and then they started running. I don't think my daughter walked for very long. She went straight into running. Just that was it. And then climbing and taking off. Climbing, we all know those stories. If they weren't our kids or somebody else's, the kid that climbed up into the way up on top in the kitchen cabinets to get cookies down. A friend of mine found his daughter on top of the refrigerator one day when she was only about 18 months old. My daughter climbed up on a high shelf and found a little teeny bottle of cologne and drank it, and then ate my hand lotion. They have odd tastes too. They just want to touch everything, taste everything, find everything. They're curious, they're into everything down low. Some of these kids will pull things out, and everything is me do, I want to do it, me do everything. And then control. No. I know this one little girl that walked around the house just yelling, no. Nobody was talking to her. Nobody was asking her any questions. She just, no. And then why? They're also very emotional, right? Very emotional. Hand a toddler an orange popsicle instead of a red popsicle, and you get a meltdown. Push the button to the elevator before they get a chance to push it. It's the end of the world. The bug that doesn't want to play with them outside, the end of the world. Everything is a crisis. And why is that happening? Well, what happens, that should not getting out. We're going to talk about that. Perfect, Pamela. What you get is similar to that now at 15. Yeah. Well, what's happening in the toddler ages? The toddlers, when we get to about that period of infancy to 3, that toddler period, what's happening in the brain is telling us that you got to figure out how to be your own person here. Because when we're infants, we're part of mom or dad or grandma or whoever's taking care of us. There's not really any separation between caregiver and infant. But in order to start getting a little bigger and getting ready to go out on our own, doing big things like preschool and kindergarten, we have to become individual people. We have to be able to prove that we can do things ourselves. So the brain starts doing these things that are pushing us and pushing us and pushing us and getting rid of some of the stuff we don't need anymore, like the clinginess and the dependency, and pushing us to become more independent. Wow. So that's why we get emotional. That's why we get controlling. That's why we take off in the middle of a supermarket or in the middle of the parking lot or in the middle of Disneyland. We just want to show that we can be our own person. All right. Go to the next. Now, toddlers, do they sound like teens? They're challenging. They want to be independent. They're curious. Me do. Yeah, I want to do it myself. I'm going to do this. I don't need your help. No. Every time you ask them something, no. The move to become independent. It starts all over again, because during that period of time from about 3 to about 9, we're kind of like, we're a little bit more easygoing as kids. Those elementary age kids, they're kind of easygoing a little bit. But once we get into preteens, that move to become independent starts again. So let's see this little blip, this adolescent brain, the second window of opportunity.
We used to think the shaping of brain wiring systems tapered off after early childhood. But neuroscience tells us the brain goes through another rapid phase of change from age 9 to 14, a second window of opportunity. Early adolescence is a crucial period for brain development, where many challenges begin to emerge. It is also a time of opportunity, when rapid changes can be harnessed to set adolescents on a positive path. Puberty initiates intense hormonal changes when the brain is forming better and faster connections between systems, improving the ability to make decisions, solve problems, understand consequences, and to gain more control over emotions and behavior. At the same time, the adolescent brain goes through a period of greater sensitivity to social evaluation and emotional reactions. Increased sensation-seeking, interest in social relationships, and exploration of identity all begin to emerge. Early adolescence brings on broadening experiences, acquisition of new skills, and formation of social networks that will have lasting impacts for the rest of a young person's life. To learn more, download the new publication, The Adolescent Brain, a second window of opportunity, on the link below.
So you see how they show 2 different periods. One was from 0 to 3, during that infant and toddler period where there's massive brain development and push. And then luckily, we get a little bit of a break between 3 and about 9 years old. Not that long, right? It could go a little bit longer. And this is the time when people start, I know in elementary school and also in the preschool years, people start putting their kids into every activity they can find, right? They overschedule them like crazy. They're in soccer, they're in dance, they're in, maybe they're in tutoring, maybe they're in, I know I had a friend whose daughter went to piano, Indian dance, ballet, tutoring, and then Girl Scouts. And our Girl Scouts were busy all the time. And kids those ages, for the most part, they really enjoy it. Nowadays, a lot of kids want to also be on the iPads and be playing with video games. But that period of time is a period of learning. You're taking in all this wonderful stuff and kind of experimenting with it. And then in preteen years, the brain starts to hit again and says, oh, you have some work to do here. Let's go into the next video and see what this our specialist has to say here.
My name's Frances Jensen, and I work at the University of Pennsylvania as the chair of neurology at the Perelman School of Medicine. The teenage brain is different from the adult brain in several ways, but two major patterns come out. First of all, because children and teenagers are actually wired to learn faster than adults, their synapses, where the brain cells talk to one another, are actually at higher numbers in childhood and adolescence. So teenagers actually have more synapses than adults. They also have more of the ability to learn, to strengthen those synapses than adults. We call that synaptic plasticity, how brain cells respond to they can be molded by the environment. That actually increased excitability of their brains is a very good thing. The second way the teenage brain is very different is that the way our brain areas are hooked up to one another, the major brain regions, is a process that takes 2.5 decades of our lives to actually occur. The brain is the last organ in the body to mature, and therefore it takes until your mid to late 20s to finish. And that property that takes a very long time, one of the major properties is the way we connect brain regions up to one another. So it's called myelination, and it starts in the back of your brain and moves forward. So the last place to connect is the frontal lobe. Frontal lobe is important for judgment, impulse control, decision making, and empathy. So when we think of teenagers, one of the problems they have is that they're not really accessing their frontal lobe as fast as they could. Teen brains are very impressionable to good things, but also to bad things. And one of the important things that I think teenagers need to know about themselves is this hidden strength is a bit of a double-edged sword in that addiction is a form of synaptic plasticity too. Instead of learning a good thing, your brain is actually learning a bad thing, which is substance abuse, and one gets the same strengthening of the wrong synapses robustly, more than in the adults. So actually teenagers can get addicted harder, stronger, longer, faster than the adult. You couple that with the fact they're risk takers, they're actually potentially putting themselves in harm's way more. But it's not just the process of getting addicted. Actually, some of these substances prevent the normal process, the good things happening in your brain, and can change the way your brain develops. People who are addicted early have a much harder time undoing that addiction later in life. There are other things, though, like stress, that can affect your brain in the adolescent years and can have long-term effects on later adult development, such as increasing the risk of depression. I find when we explain some of the new research on the teenage brain to parents and teachers, there's a sense of, so that's why they did it. Oh, now I get it.
So lots of different changes that are happening, things that we didn't really know that much about before. You can go to the next slide, Peggy. So all that period of time, and she was saying, even though the previous slide showed a lot of that brain development is 9 to 14, the brain development continues through to about 27 years old. So adolescence, this period of adolescence, people are really seeing differently than just until you're 20. You're really seeing that that brain doesn't stop forming and building that frontal lobe, which is so important. That's the thinking part, until we're like 25, 27. We say girls mature a little faster, so it's 25, boys 27, but it's all variable. So your kids start hitting that preteen period, and they hit puberty, and physical changes start, right? You've been this nerdy little kid, and all of a sudden you start getting taller, maybe heavier, or taller and skinnier. Boys start developing body odor. Kids start developing acne, hair growth, where there was never hair growth before. Girls start developing or not developing breasts as they want to. They start getting periods. Boys' penis and testicles change, and boys start getting erections and ejaculations. Maybe they're getting wet dreams. This is pretty weird stuff, especially if you're not expecting it to happen. And that's part of the thing, is that people are starting to talk about a lot of these changes now with kids, so that kids are more prepared for what's happening, because physical changes are a little strange, and kids compare themselves to each other. And it can be a tough time when you don't kind of fit in the same way as everybody else. But remember, the brain is changing too. The brain is remodeling just the way it did, somewhat the way it did in toddlerhood, which is it's changing for those needs that we have to become, this time, an adult. Not just a separate person, but an adult. An adult. That's tricky. That's much different. And it can be scary to become an adult. You'll have a lot of kids talking about, no, I just want to be a kid forever. Mess around, have fun, don't have to get a job, get money whenever I want to. But the brain is starting to prune and specialize too. So maybe your kid's been involved in 5 different activities after school. Now they're trying to find what really interests them. So maybe they've been playing 3 different sports. Now they're just going to play soccer. Now they find out maybe they really like art, and they're going to spend more time with art or music, or maybe social justice. You know, some of our teens in our world have really become strong in their teens in regards to social justice. They've really started getting out there, speaking and pushing. There are kids that go and speak in front of Congress. They're teens, because they're really starting to find who they are and specialize in finding their passion in life. And this is really important, that you find your passion in life. And this is what all this kind of is building up to, is to find out and develop who you are. Now, you probably know, because it's happened to you, this changes over time, right? When I was a kid, I wanted to be a doctor. And then when I get into high school, I found I didn't do that well in sciences. Maybe that's not a good thing to do. So then I thought, well, maybe I'll be a writer. I'll be a foreign correspondent for a newspaper, and I'll go all over the world. But I found I didn't like the way journalists had to write and what they had to do. So that wasn't good. So what will I do now? And then I went to college, and I thought maybe I'll be a marine biologist. And I took oceanography, and I worked and worked and worked, and I still just got a C. And I thought, well, maybe this isn't good. Then I went to the English and philosophy department. I didn't really like that. Then psychology, surprisingly enough, I thought that was boring. And then I hit on anthropology, and anthropology was fascinating. So then I went and I finished my degree in anthropology. And then I thought, well, what am I going to do with anthropology? I either have to be an anthropologist and go study somebody, or I have to teach. Didn't want to do either one. So I thought, I really want to work with kids. So I started working with kids. And some years later, I went back and got my master's degree for social work. But it took a while. It took a while, and it changed. So I know some of your kids have had this talk about, I want to go to medical school. I want to do this. And then they get closer to it and they change their minds. It really wasn't what they wanted to do. And this will change again. And a lot of people will change careers in midlife, 40s, 50s, completely change careers, go back to school, go back to different work, and completely change careers. So finding out who you are, finding what your passion is, may change over time. So don't be surprised if your kids are kind of changing what they want to be and what they want to do. But this is a period of just really looking at yourself and figuring out who you are. And the one thing about teens is that during this period of time, you really feel like you did when you were a toddler, that you're invincible, that nothing can stop you, that you can do anything you put your mind to. And that's why sometimes when you're doing risky behaviors, you think nothing's going to happen to you. Because remember that thought, that frontal lobe, the one that thinks and says, oh, let's stop for a minute, isn't going to be there yet. So you get very, you do things that are very risky because you have this passion and you want to see it and you want to do it and you don't believe anything's going to happen. Well, one of the folks that we're going to hear from now, and is really important in terms of understanding adolescence, and somebody, if you really want to know about adolescence and your kids want to understand what's going on with them too, this is an awesome person to take a look at, Dr. Daniel Siegel, who's a psychiatrist that studies the brain, has studied the brain for years, and he has two sons, so he went through adolescence. He has put adolescence into a very different perspective. He said adolescence is really exciting, and this is what's going on during adolescence, and he kind of explains it. So let's listen to Dr. Daniel Siegel. This is his book.
So the brain changes by nature's design to get you ready to have four fundamental elements that I'm going to name now. And luckily, if you reorder them and rearrange them and spell them in certain ways, it's the essence of adolescence is an acronym that actually spells out these four elements. Let's do it. ESSENCE. That's the word essence. The first one is ES, emotional spark. And to describe this to you, I'm going to briefly enable you to picture this, because the Tarcher Penguin people have been really, really kind. They have taped a model of the brain under your chair that you can take home with you. And if you reach under your chair, put your hand under your chair, see where they've taped it with that blue tape that comes up, and if you pull out your arm, you will find attached to your arm a hand. And does anyone find a hand attached to your arm? There it is. So that you can take home with you. And this is your handout for today's talk. And this is your handy model of the brain. If you put your thumb over the top and put your fingers over your thumb, put your thumb in your palm and put your fingers over your thumb, this is the model of the brain. And basically what I want to point out to you is that you have a higher part of the brain called the cortex. If you lift up your fingers, the lower part of the brain, the limbic area, this thumb area, and the brainstem are basically the source of our emotions, or rise up from the body to the brainstem and the limbic area, these lower areas. So we'll just call these the lower areas. It turns out that what nature does is make it so that the input from the lower areas to the higher thinking, reasoning part of the cortex, this higher part of your hand model, is much higher. So we're going to name that an emotional spark. And what it means is that, and there's pros and cons to these changes. The pros are that adolescents have a more intense emotional influence on their thinking than earlier in their lives, and often than later in their lives. This emotional spark, of course, gives life passion and energy and vitality. But what's the downside of this emotional spark? Is it makes life less predictable, because you can become more moody, you don't know how you're going to feel in a given moment. So there is more shift in emotional states because of this emotional spark. Now, the word emotion is really interesting, because the way to think about it is emotion really means evoking motion. So emotion gets you to act. And part of the drive of this emotional spark is to get you to move your body and to get ready to leave home. There's a drive to life that happens during adolescence that's very important to note. The second thing, the SE of this emotional spark, and now social engagement is what the next term is. It turns out that the brain is actually programmed when adolescence hits to push away from parents and move toward peers. So social engagement with peers is a natural part of adolescence. And a lot of parents will say to me they know the day that it began. For example, they'll say, well, I was walking my young child to school, my 12-year-old, and I went to the bus, and usually they give me a big hug and a kiss, and on that day onward, they would just push away from me, as if I didn't exist. Did any of you experience that? And a lot of the adults are going, yeah. And this is the natural way the adolescent brain is creating this readiness to push away. Now, why would adolescents need their peers more than their parents? Because you have to get ready to leave home, number one. And why do you need to be hanging out with your peers? There's safety in numbers, exactly. All mammalian species, the adolescents are social creatures, and they hang around with other adolescents because you are safer in groups. Now, membership in a group then is basically equivalent to surviving and not dying. So when an adolescent comes to you and says, I need to buy this jacket, not this one, but I need to buy a jacket, a certain jacket, or wear certain shoes or whatever, the feeling of life and death about it is about this genetic history that if you are a member of a peer group, you will survive, and otherwise you will die. So it doesn't mean you have to buy the jacket or the shoes, but as a parent, it means you can tune into what that feeling is. So that's the social engagement. And the novelty is one of the most powerful issues, novelty seeking. The brain creates a drive toward novelty in a very clever way. Have any of you heard of this neurotransmitter, this chemical called dopamine? Dopamine. Well, dopamine is a really interesting chemical, does a lot of different things, but one of the major things that it's involved in is something called the reward circuits. And one of the most rewarding kinds of activities that releases dopamine are novel activities. And so what happens in the adolescent brain is the baseline levels of dopamine drop, but the release levels are hugely increased. And what this means is that adolescents, when they're not doing anything, can be really, really bored. So they want to be engaged in something to get their dopamine secreted, but it means that they will be driven to try new things. Now, one of the kinds of new things that really secretes dopamine is something that involves risk and danger and pushing the boundaries. Now, the upside of that is it gets you ready to leave home and try something dangerous. But what's the downside? You can do something dangerous and actually get hurt. So you can imagine this struggle in the brain about how to get this kid out of the house, right? Because you got to take risks to get out of the house. This is what you got to realize as a parent, is that if your child is completely risk averse, they're actually going to be having a hard time leaving home. So it's actually a significant issue if you're totally avoiding any kind of trying out of novelty, which this dopamine change involves. The final part of Essence is creative exploration. It turns out that when you look at the structure of the brain and how it's changing, the brain is also designed to push away from the world that the adults have created for them. And you know, I used to run a program with some colleagues at UCLA called the Center for Culture, Brain, and Development. So we would just study how culture shapes the brain across different societies. And what we were able to show was that, in fact, the way you are taught things, not only by your family and attachment relationships, but by the larger culture, shapes the structure of the brain.
So interesting, huh? So let's look at some of that stuff, the emotional spark. Yeah, and you see a lot of that, some of you. And of course, this varies according to your kid, because you know, if you have 5 kids, every one of them will be different. Some are just more emotional, some are a little bit more easygoing, some of them are in between. So what you see in these is just like you saw when they were toddlers. Some are going to be extreme. Some are going to be kind of easygoing. They'll play with things, but they don't have to climb on top of the refrigerator. They don't have to run away when you're in the middle of the parking lot. But some kids have that need. So the emotional spark, that passion to live life fully, and the emotional storms and moodiness that come. And sometimes it just like comes out of the blue, right? And they're taken off guard. Why did I fall apart? Oh my gosh. And the social engagement, the desire for peer relationships. Now, if you have somebody that's sensitive, they really want these peer relationships. What happens when their group of friends kind of turns against them? The emotional piece kicks in, and it can be the end of the world. And that's tricky, because they really can, some kids really sink deep. You have a crush on a boy and they don't pay attention to you, or crush on a girl, they don't pay attention to you. Somebody says something that's really humiliating. The social engagement, the emotional spark, it combines to really be hurtful, more hurtful to teens than at a different age. And especially if you have a very sensitive teen. The one thing too about that desire for peer relationships is, and getting into groups, is that if you have a kid that's pretty positive thinking, they're probably going to get into a group that's fairly positive thinking. But if you have a kid that's the outsider and they really have a negative view of themselves and of life, we run the risks of them gravitating toward the kids that are kind of the outsiders too, the ones that are maybe not the best influence in the world. Novelty, and this is tricky, especially for some of those kids that are really experimenters. They want to try all kinds of things. This is when the drugs come in too. Somebody says, here, try this, it's really cool. And if they're not thinking about it, and if they really, really just want to go for the new stuff, that chances are they're going to try it. And they are subject to peer pressure along with that novelty. Come on, let's do it. Let's do it. They love trying new things. You get the kids that like risky things too. The risky drivers, once they start to learn how to drive, they drive crazy. That's really scary. But you also get the kids that just like to go places like Knott's Berry Farm and ride all the rides, or Magic Mountain and ride all the rides, because it gives them a rush. It can be scary. They love scary movies. They love all these scary things, and they just love trying new things. And some will push it more than others, just like they did when they were toddlers. That a creative exploration, they don't want to be like everybody else, but they're being like their peer group. They still need those special clothes to be like their peer group, but they want to push away from adults. They want to push away from the same old, same old. I want to be different. I want to be me. It can cause a lot of stress because maybe they're not like their peer group when they do that. Who's the, oh gosh, I'm blanking. Peggy, who's the one that's the girl that's on the planet, taking care of the planet? She's from Europe. Somebody know who I'm talking about? She sat out in front of an important building. She was like 14 all by herself.
Oh, I'm seeing her face. Greta Thunberg?
Yeah.
Yes, thank
Greta
you.
Thunberg. Thank
Yes.
you. Yeah. Yeah, she pushed away and she had nobody with her initially. Very strong-willed, very passionate about what she was doing. And it's amazing what some of these kids can do. But she had a lot of self-confidence in being able to do it. And because of that, she really got a lot of other kids and adults and organizations and entire governments to get behind her. So it's amazing what teens can do sometimes. So sometimes they will find amazing things to go after, but it does create stress. But you'll see the difference between your kids, the ones that are kind of scared to go out and try anything new, the ones that panic if they have to do a presentation in front of the class, but the other kids that really feel a whole lot more comfortable. So this is really variable according to the kids, but this is what's going on. Why? Again, because they're moving toward becoming adults and building their own lives. And that's something as parents, sometimes we forget that this life that our child has is their life. It's not ours. And they will be the ones to reap benefits and the consequences, whether positive or negative. And we want them to understand that and feel proud of it. So what are some of the things we can do about that? Because when they were toddlers, it only took a few years, but as adolescents, it takes a lot longer to go through this period. So let's hear from the kids what they think that they need from their parents.
I feel weird and awkward. I feel like that's just normal now that I'm a teenager.
This is a hard time we're going through. We're growing, we're changing.
There's obviously a lot of awesome aspects, but
I feel like school is one of the biggest challenges.
It's like really stressful trying to get good grades because I want to make my parents happy and my teachers happy. So it's like focusing on other people.
It's like you're never gonna be good enough unless you only get A's, and if you get a B, well then there goes your chances of life and being in college.
I've lost all motivation, to be honest.
you know, I wanted to be friends with the popular kids so I can go to the good parties.
When you see other people hanging out without you or doing something that you want to be doing, it's like, Why can't I be there? Did they not invite me? Am I not good enough?
We get so caught up in like what other people think about us.
Why act some way that I'm not in order to impress people that I don't like?
I want to be accepted for who I am.
I compare myself to others, which I think is very unhealthy. Oh, well, I don't look like this girl, I don't look like this person, and like, we have different body shapes. I have pimples and they don't. It makes me feel like I'm not good enough.
I kind of hate to admit this, but it does kind of give me satisfaction when I see that I have over a certain amount of views or over a certain amount of likes.
It's like super addicting. I'll sit there and I'll scroll there for hours and just do nothing and be super unproductive, which is terrible. I hate that.
People can be mean sometimes if it's a certain person that has a certain power amount of following, or that's really, you think is really cool, and they say something bad about you. It would really hurt your feelings.
Teenagers are definitely, they're mean.
When I'm bullied, it makes me feel sad, maybe depressed even.
I've always been on the bigger side, and I've experienced a lot of bullying from that. It hurts a lot, especially when you're at school, and for a lot of kids, school is their safe space.
If it's online, it's easier to report them or block them, but if it's in person, they tell teachers, but when you tell teachers, they're like, it's just kids playing around. It's not cool to bully somebody because it could make them feel really terrible, and it could like lead them to do very bad things like abuse themselves, and the worst is suicide.
Mental health is real. Just because, someone's a 12-year-old girl doesn't mean they can't experience depression or anxiety. And I know from experience where parents will be like, well, that's just, you see that on social media, or it's a trend, everyone has that. But it's like, no, it takes a big toll on kids.
I think the parents should definitely be supportive. That's like the first step. Do as much as you can to help them follow their dreams.
Encourage them, be happy for them, support them.
Remind me of how good I'm doing and that they're proud of me. That would really make me feel good and motivate me to work harder. Understand that school is hard. I think they should definitely accept their children for who they are. They should try and get to know them better, ask them questions.
Just be like, hey, like, I'm here for you, like, whatever you need, I'm yours. I love you so much.
I feel like there should be much more patience with us. Just give us some time to grow.
It's not easy being a teenager, and sitting there yelling at us, disciplining us all the time doesn't make it any better.
Every once in a while, I'd like to hear that they were wrong. I never hear that.
Being an adult and approaching a teen, you definitely have to have an open mind. Dad, put yourself in my shoes.
My mom always tries to help solve my problems when I just want her to really listen. Mom, Dad, listen to me.
Listen to me.
Listen, please.
Listen, and don't make their feelings feel less valid.
Just give us a shot and hear what we have to say.
So great to hear the kids really listen to them. When we had our toddlers, it was easier to figure out what we had to do for our toddlers and to help them kind of get through those toddler years. For one thing, we needed to watch them, right? I remember when my daughter was little, we would go out with a group of moms and group of kids. The kids were all about 2, 3, 4-year-olds. And the reason we went out in a group is so that we could watch them, not just play with them, but watch them. It really took a whole group of people to catch those kids when they did things like take off across the park and just keep going. We needed somebody to stop them, and not everybody noticed. We missed the one little girl that showed everybody how she was Superwoman and jumped off the bars and broke her arm. But but with toddlers, a little bit easier how they need us. With teens, it's a little trickier. And one of the things that they were saying about listen to us, listen to us, listen to us. Sometimes we have kids that don't talk a whole lot, though, and that gets a little tricky. But let's hear this one. And this is wonderful if you are able to pick up one of the books. It's called How to Talk So Your Teens Will Listen, and How to Talk So Your Teens Will Listen, and How to Listen So Your Teens Will Talk. Look at that. And it's great. So let's listen to this lady here talk about that.
Many parents face, those kids become teens, they stop communicating. Parenting expert Judy Arnell is here to give us some tips on how to get your teen to talk. They're chatty, 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 and all of a sudden when they become teenagers, it just stops, and you get the sullen silent treatment.
Or the,
Yes.
Yes, yes, that's
Those
very
great
common.
sounds.
Yeah, yeah, really informative sounds.
Very bonding, like, how do we get them out of that?
Well, probably the number one thing is we need to do less talking and give them more space to talk. So we need to do more listening and not be too judgmental. So one of the great ways to get kids talking is to get out there and get walking with them. And sometimes driving helps if you're not too distracted.
And I've heard friends that are parents of teens say that driving is often a terrific way, and not to make the kid feel like they're boxed in and they're going to get, bulleted with questions, but you just sort of set a sort of an easy tone, and the words sometimes just come.
Yeah, so asking open-ended questions while you're driving, like, how did you feel about that? What did you think? So questions that start with how or what are good for not getting one-word answers. You get a bit more. The other thing is to validate how teens are feeling. So it doesn't mean you agree with them. It means you accept them. So things like, gee, that must have sounded pretty frustrating for you when you went through that. And then just accepting whatever they answer back.
And don't try to solve the problem for them at that point. You should have done this, this, and this, and it would have worked out better if you did this, this, and this. Just put it out there, and then let them, if they're feeling validated, they're more likely to come out with more.
Exactly. They don't want your solutions unless they ask. So it's okay to offer and say, would you like my input on helping you solve this? And they may say no. And then we just leave it, because it's all about problem solving, helping teens solve their problems rather than us moving in and doing it for them.
We've been solving their problems for those years up to the teen years.
And we're so good at it.
Of course
but we
are.
have to back
We have
off.
all the answers. So that's a challenge for parents. You have to back off, more listening, how or what questions are going to elicit more of a response, and create an environment, walking, driving, even doing a task together when you're doing the dishes together. Create an environment that you've got some words coming forward, and you just absorb them and acknowledge.
Yep.
And okay.
The final piece of that too is do more problem solving with them rather than punishment, because you're in the final third of parenting. Start treating them the adult they're becoming.
Oh man.
Yeah.
This is a reality check for me. All right, Judy, thank you for those great tips. You can get more info at professionalparenting.ca. Judy's got a ton of great information on there, and you can pick up the latest edition of Calgary's Child Magazine.
Tricky, huh? It would be nice if we all kind of knew at the beginning that this whole thing of childhood is such a process and what happens through it. And it would be great if the kids knew too. So the book that Daniel Siegel did, the one called Brainstorm, he actually did more for the teens than for the parents to kind of understand what's happening with them. But it's tough being a teen, and it's tough being a parent of a teen. It's just tough being a parent, period. Especially if you have those kids that are a little bit more challenging than others. It's a learning time for them, but it's a learning time for us. And sometimes we think, well, what's my part of this whole thing? Am I even important? No matter what they say, no matter what they do, our kids still need us. Parents of the safety zone, the home base, the place where teens want to feel accepted. And that's a real big deal what the kids were saying there. They want to feel accepted. They want to feel safe. They want to feel loved. No matter who they become, they want to feel that their parents are always going to be there for them. Just like we were there for them when they were babies. They may have been hard to soothe. Well, a 15-year-old could be really hard to soothe too. They may yell and scream, just like that they did when they were babies, but they still want to know that mom, dad, grandma, caregiver is there for them, and that they're safe, and that they will be accepted no matter what. This is the safety zone. We all have to have a little faith in our kids and help them believe in themselves as to who they are. And sometimes that's tough. That's hard to get to that point where you see yourself and love yourself and believe that you can actually do things. Even as adults, we'd like our parents to accept us, believe in us, and support us in the journey, right? And to always be there. I remember as an adult, I would go and visit my parents. They lived in Mexico at the time, and I would go down there and I would let my mother cook for me. And I felt bad because I thought, I should be doing this for her. But you know what? It felt really nice to have her cooking for me and kind of in her way taking care of me, because it was home. It was home. It was that pure point of safety, and that felt really good. Later on, I got to give back to her and take care of her, but it was just nice to know that mom was still there. Sometimes it is hard to get our kids to kind of allow us to be there for them. Some of them will push more than others. One of the things she was saying was sometimes when you walk with them or do a chore with them or drive with them, and one of the good things is when you're driving your teen and their friends, they talk in the back seat. It's like they don't even know you're there, and they will talk and they will say all kinds of things. Not to get involved in the conversation at that point, but later on you could go, I wonder what, and have them tell you a little bit more about whatever they were talking about. But it's a great way to get to know what's going on. The other thing that they didn't mention that we were discussing in our parent support group last time is that a really nice time to kind of get your kids to talk to you is at night. And they're going to bed and it's the end of the day, and you just go in there and you may lie with them and relaxed and just talk. And it's amazing that they will really start to talk more with you and open up more, surprisingly enough. They really do want us there. They really love us. And the more that we're there for them and helping them through this process, not telling them how to do it, but helping them and supporting them through the process of becoming an adult. Yikes. The more it feels like we're doing this together, like it's a team. Parents and kids, it's a team. It's just a different kind of team. But be patient in the process, and understand that it is a process and it can be tough, and be there for your kids and watch them and listen to them. Don't think they don't need you, because they really, really do. It's a huge time of need for the kids, but you have to kind of help them and problem solve with them, and then kind of help them go out into the world on their own and do the things that they're excited and passionate about, but also problem solve some of the challenging situations, the trying the drugs, the trying the alcohol, the learning how to drive, the driving safely, the treating people with respect. All that kind of good stuff has to be learned too. And we can be there to support them, not by doing this kind of stuff, but by listening to them and by helping them kind of explore their choices in the journey on their own. So it can be a fun process. It can be exciting. It can be scary, but it can be fun too. The next next slide is a whole list of different resources that we have. You can kind of check some of these out, but if you have questions or concerns or specific issues that you want to talk about, put them in the chat now and let's see what everybody has.